3, which is the 3 categories of ways that our emotions function for us. So we just finished with that they help to motivate us and organize us for action. But now what about the second one? Emotions are hardwired, rapid systems for communicating to others. And we can communicate to others in speech, the way I'm doing with you now, or if there was something behind you that I could see that was maybe could be potentially frightening, I could say, hey, there's something frightening behind you. Or I could go, oh my God! And then you would be alerted, right? And then you might look around. And so, or I could communicate sadness to you, and you might say, oh, Charlie, are you all right? But to communicate it with my face, my body, my gestures, my voice tone that indicate my emotions is more likely to grip you than to say, hey, I'm feeling sad today. And same with shame is going to communicate to you how I'm experiencing myself in a way that I need to hide or not expose myself. In other words, we have ways with our faces and our bodies and our voice tones and words to communicate and elicit responses. So very powerful function of emotions is the interpersonal function, okay? And then there's the third function is also communicating. But this is an interesting one. We communicate to ourselves with our emotions. So for instance, when you say, I have a gut feeling I should get out of here. You know, you've picked up something has told you to be afraid of something, even if you can't name it yet, you can't spell it out, but it's like you listen to your gut. I mean, you experience your gut and you pay attention to it. So you're communicating to yourself with your gut. You communicate to yourself with, your physiology. You notice the speed up of your heart, your breathing, your just sort of activation, and it tells you something. It tells you there may be something you need to get mobilized to do, right? So your emotions are a rapid and interesting way to communicate to yourself. A little hint for when you're working with people who aren't very conversant with emotions, or they're not interested in emotion, they don't think they have many emotions. Not usually people with borderline personality disorder, but some people with one version or another of alexithymia or other just problems knowing their emotions. And they don't really have a language for emotions. But if you start telling them that emotions are filled with information, they're like coded. In them is packages of information, they can get interested in it sometimes, thinking of it in a more rational-minded way. And so we do communicate to ourselves, and there is one problem with this that's mentioned in the book, which you probably already have thought of. What if your emotions communicate something to you that's actually not factual? Like your emotions communicate to you to be afraid of something when actually there's nothing objectively to be afraid of, but you trust your emotions and therefore you back off from things and you avoid things. This is also could lead to a phobia. Some things like this can lead to a panic disorder. Things like this can lead to OCD. So if you take your emotions as facts rather than as suggestions, sometimes you can get stuck with fixed ideas where you believe in your emotions, but your emotions are actually false alarms or false indicators, okay? By the way, when you then do the homework, have people do their homework, and they go to emotion regulation, let's see, which one is it? Worksheet number 2, I think. It's a good handout, within your book, there'll be a worksheet number 2, and it'll say it's from Emotion Regulation, handout 3, which we've just been looking at. So when you assign the homework, you can use this. There's also alternatives. You can use 2A or 2B. So you could look at these ahead. But 2 is a good one where you're describing a prompting event, and then you're describing motivation to action. Then you have another prompting event, and you describe how it communicated to others. and then another prompting event, and then how the emotion communicated to me. All of this is, I misled you a little. It's the same prompting event for all three and how they could do that. So, and then the next one is gives an example of that. So 2A. And then 2B is an emotion diary, so people can be keeping track of their emotions and indicating with each time they write something down about an emotion, which of the functions it was serving. So it gets people thinking about it. Next handout, number 4, I think is also a useful one, and it's the question of what makes it hard to regulate my emotions. And what makes it hard is, Linehan has categorized 6 different things that can make it hard that are worth thinking about. If you're just running into, God, is it hard to regulate my emotions? Every time I get anxiety, it just goes to 100%. And every time I'm ashamed, I just hate myself. And so there's not much modulation of emotions. It's going to extremes all the time. So what are some of the factors that could do that? And there's a list of them. There's an explanation of them when you read about teaching this. But, biology is a factor. Sometimes, it's very hard to regulate because, in fact, your nervous system is biased either from genetics or from early environmental experience or later traumatic experiences, things that shape the development of your nervous system so that at a given point, it's just automatic for you that when you are triggered into fear, you go very high, very fast. So that makes it harder to regulate emotions. You might be able to do some things about that, and it's helpful and validating to sort these out and figure out what is making it hard. The second one is just lack of skill. And of course, we're trying to give them skills, but the lack of skill can make it very difficult to regulate emotions. And that's a good one for people to know about because they think they're just weak or they're bad or they're incompetent or there's something missing in them. And sometimes what's missing is they didn't learn the skills. These skills most of them are invisible. They can't learn them by watching other people all the time. And they certainly maybe grew up in an environment where it wasn't well modeled. The next one is reinforcement. Sometimes emotional behaviors of different kinds are reinforced. I'm just thinking of one of my own, and I'd never thought of it this way before. But I had this syndrome, you might say, of being so afraid of public speaking much earlier in my career that I would compulsively over-prepare. And so my fear or anxiety was intense. I don't want to go into the details, the graphic details, but right now, mainly because of time, but it was really intense. And then I would compulsively over-prepare until it's time to give a talk. Then I'd give it. And then I would get reinforced because people would say, oh, that was really interesting. That was good. And my fears were relieved. And I felt that this both reinforced the whole pattern of being very afraid and then being then doing compulsive over-preparation and then getting reinforced that things went well. See, so I actually was mistakenly thinking I'm being reinforced for the whole pattern, and I had to go through an exposure treatment to unhook these things and be able to realize that I had a lot of dysfunctional beliefs and feelings about giving a talk. Moodiness is another one. I think this is in here because Linehan has talked so frequently about the problem of mood-dependent behavior, that we have trouble regulating our emotions because we're in a certain mood. So it takes effort to regulate emotions. So if you're not in the mood to regulate your emotions, you just sort of let them hang out, let them go. And so getting moody, getting in a mood where you really don't care, or you're just overloaded, or you're in a bad mood, so you don't want to put in the effort to regulate emotions. These things can really affect your ability to regulate your emotions. Emotional overload So here, no matter who you are, if you get beyond a certain point and you've had several prompting events, several cues, and you just are getting piled on with things that are distressing, you get to a certain point where you're at emotional overload, or even one event can push you there if it's the wrong event at the wrong time. And then, you get over 90 out of 100, let's say, on a distress scale, and your usual emotion regulation skills are just not going to work for you. They won't be accessible, or they won't work. It's sort of like trying to sail a boat in a hurricane. So you need more extreme arousal skills, and those are also taught in distress tolerance. So, but you need to learn something here about when are you beyond the point of being able to use the usual skills, and you need to go to these. And the final one is emotion myths. Myths, how you think about emotions, can get in the way of regulating emotions. Like if you think, for instance, that emotions are bad things, or emotions indicate that you're weak, or emotions indicate that you're out of control. Whatever your beliefs are, then you can, your beliefs are fighting against the capacity to regulate them because you don't think you can, or you don't think you should. I've known people, and you may have known people, that think they should express all of their emotions because they were invalidated when they were younger, and they don't want to have to curb their emotions anymore. And so they think the only way to be real, the only way to be true to themselves, is actually to express the depths of their emotion at every time it happens, and so that can get in the way of regulating emotion. So cognitions, thoughts, myths can, and there's nice handouts here. The next one is a bunch is handout 4A. Is a bunch of myths about emotions that people can go through, look at. They can circle the ones that apply to them, and then they actually could add others if they have others, and then they can work on challenges. A good way to do this is to have someone in the group, in your skills group, argue in favor of one of the myths. Like I might argue in favor of some emotions are stupid, and then I try to mount an argument to the group that's giving examples of how emotions can be stupid. And then as the leader, you stop that argument and ask people to provide a challenge, provide a response to that argument. And then the person listens to the challenges and tries to figure out which ones could work for them, which ones would work, okay? So, the model, the big one. I'm going to start on this, and then I'm going to run out of time on this video, and I'll continue. But this is this. Now, why am I I think you can tell I'm making sort of a big deal out of the way I'm bringing this up, and it's because in more than 25 years of teaching these skills, this particular skill, teaching this model, is one of the two that has been hardest for most DBT skills group leaders to teach. And there's good reason for that, I think. And so I want to introduce this to you. This is a flow chart, a model for describing emotions. And it starts with vulnerability factors, you can see at the upper left, and things that render you vulnerable, okay? And then once you're vulnerable, then there's a prompting event right here. Something happens. A bear enters the room. It's a prompting event for fear, right? And to the degree that you're paying attention, to the degree that you have attention and awareness, you pick that up. So the prompting event then elicits attention, and it might elicit an interpretation, a cognition. Like, bears shouldn't be in here. I think I should leave. But most likely with a bear coming in the room, you would go directly from the prompting event that you're aware of over to the big box here that has all these components in it, right? So just to close out this introduction to this, the big problem with teaching this is look how many factors are here in one page. It's complicated. And people who don't like to think